We previously mentioned that speculation is an art. But we have to ask, what are some of the principles of this art? What are some of its rules? Well, let's talk about some of these rules. He mentions that to the artist alone are the rules of his art valuable. So what are these rules? And again, what are some of these principles? One of the principles is to sell down to a sleeping point. Well, what does that mean? Let's say that you put $100,000 in the stock, but you can't sleep at night. You sleep twisting and turning, thinking about that $100,000 you put at risk. So what should you do? You should reduce the amount of interest in that stock. Maybe you might want to reduce that $100,000 to $50,000. Maybe you want to reduce that $100,000 to $5,000. Only you know what is your right sleeping point. You have to decide for yourself what is your sleeping point. There is no one else that is going to tell you what is your sleeping point. And you should never overtrade. He says that to take an interest larger than the capital justifies is to invite disaster. Which means that you should trade in small amounts and take only moderate positions. And one good question is to ask yourself, how much of a loss would unnerve you? What if you lose 20% of the $100,000 and your investment is down to $80,000? Would that unnerve you? If that type of fluctuations is unnerving you, then it would affect your judgment. You have to decide how much losses would unnerve you before you even go into the stock. If you were to initially put $100,000 into the stock, you might want to consider scaling that back to a smaller amount and make sure you don't even use leverage. Another example is that if you put $10,000 into the market and you're down to $2,000, so that $10,000 is now only worth $2,000, that's an 80% loss. Would that unnerve you? What if you put $50,000 into the stock market and you're now down to $48,000, a 4% loss? Would that unnerve you? You don't want to be unnerved by the market, because then your judgment becomes worthless. So you have to sell down to a sleeping point so that your judgment is still valuable. So you want to take moderate positions to keep your judgment clear and to preserve the balance of the mind. Keep the following fundamental principles in mind. Act so to keep the mind clear and its judgment trustworthy.